I don't even know why I'm writing this. Maybe I just need to get it off my chest. Sometimes you feel stuck inside yourself, unable to see where you're going or what you truly want. That's exactly where I am. For the first time, I've decided to share my story. When I was 18, I got married. Back then, I thought it was a fairy tale. I met a man, we fell in love, got married, and then I became pregnant. At that age, you feel like you know everything about life. But life, as it turned out, knew more. A couple of years into the marriage, I realized something was off. He started coming home late, hiding messages on his phone, and then there was that incident with his coworker. I won't go into details. It wasn't just about infidelity. We fought often. He was cruel, and sometimes I thought he might hit me when he was angry. Distrust, fear, constant arguments. That was my life for years. I stayed for my daughter. I know that sounds cliché, but it's true. Leaving when your child is 5, 6, or 7 years old feels impossible. I wanted her to grow up with both parents. Every time I thought I couldn't take it anymore, that it was over, I looked at her and thought, I have to stay. For her. But one day, I realized I couldn't do it anymore. I was exhausted, tired of the pain, the shame, the constant reminder that I didn't matter. She was 10 when I packed his things, left them by the door, and said, enough. He left, and it was the hardest decision I've ever made. But I don't regret it. Sometimes you have to let go of what's destroying you. After he was gone, life was hard. Working, raising a child, trying not to fall apart. That became my reality. I held on as best I could, and for a while I thought I was doing okay. But the truth was, I felt hollow inside. I'd lost my belief in relationships. Yes, there were men, dates, attempts to start something new. But I always found a reason to pull away. It felt like they were all the same, like no one could truly understand me or care for me. There's a certain fear that comes with trying to trust again. That was me. Dating became a kind of ritual. You dress up, put on makeup, smile. They compliment you, talk about their lives. But it all felt so pointless, like I already knew how it would end. I caught myself thinking that I couldn't open up to anyone anymore. Years passed like this. Then my daughter grew up. When she moved out, I felt an emptiness I wasn't prepared for. I thought I could handle it. I'd gotten used to being alone, but it wasn't the same. The house was quiet, too quiet. No one called, no one waited for me at home. I tried to fill the void with hobbies, work, and walks, but the emptiness remained. Of course, she called. She visited. She asked how I was. I always said I was fine, but she knows me better than I know myself. She saw through it all, and I just kept living the way I always had. People say, loneliness is a choice. I'm not so sure about that. Sometimes you just don't know any other way. When you live alone, time feels like it slows down. I'd set an alarm in the morning, but I'd get up earlier because really no one was waiting for me. Work, errands, cleaning. It all became a cycle I simply went through. Some days I thought, maybe this is it. This is my life. Not happy, not unhappy. Just life. As the years passed, I stopped seeking joy or pleasure. I didn't notice how my life was slipping away. I suppose that's normal. When you're alone for so long, solitude becomes a habit. It was comfortable, and sometimes comfort is a terrible thing. I realized that too late. You don't take risks, you don't hope, you don't expect anything, and no one can hurt you. My daughter saw this. She called, asked how I was. Sometimes she tried to get me to go out, to a concert, a cafe, a walk. I always had an excuse. Work. I'm tired. maybe next time. Each time, her voice grew more insistent. She was worried about me. I knew it, but I couldn't change anything. I thought she just wanted to be a good daughter, to make sure I wasn't giving up. But I wasn't giving up. I'd just learned to live in my shell. It sounds strange, but it felt safe there. One day, she showed up at my house with a big bag of groceries and a bottle of wine. "You can't keep living like this, Mom," she said as she set the bag on the kitchen counter. I brushed it off, told her I was fine. But she wasn't having it. We stayed up late that night. She told me about her work, her life. I listened, smiled, nodded. It was a role I knew well, to be there, to listen, to support. We talked about everything and nothing until she asked, "Mom, have you ever thought that it's time for a change?" Her question was so simple, yet I didn't know how to answer. I knew she was right, but I wanted to tell her that everything was fine. I even tried, but she stopped me. She said she didn't want me to keep living just for myself. After she left, I couldn't sleep. Her words kept playing in my mind. She was right. But how do you change when most of your life is behind you and you're so used to your routine? A few days later, she called. Her voice was softer than usual. She asked how I was, and of course, I said I was fine. Then she said she wanted to invite me to dinner. My intuition told me she had something planned, but I agreed. When we met, she seemed different. Confident, but slightly tense. We had dinner, talked. She kept delaying whatever it was she wanted to say. I didn't press, but I knew it wasn't just a casual meal. Finally, she placed her hand on mine and said, "Mom, you know I just want you to be happy." These words hit me harder than I expected. They sounded so simple, yet behind them lay such care, such sincerity, that I almost burst into tears. Of course, I smiled and said I was fine, but she just shook her head. "I want to invite you somewhere. It's not exactly a typical place, but I think you'll like it." I thought it was some new restaurant or bar, somewhere we could sit together, drink some wine, and talk about what was on our minds. I was even a little excited because it had been a long time since I'd gone out. Her voice was so confident, so genuine, that I agreed right away. We met at her place. She looked stunning, as always, young, beautiful, put together. I often catch myself marveling at how strong and determined she has become, despite everything we've been through. She told me to wear something comfortable but stylish. I was curious, but I didn't ask too many questions. I chose something simple: jeans, a light blouse, a pair of earrings, and a touch of makeup. When we got in the car, I still thought it was going to be a typical evening. She chatted about her work, her vacation plans, and I listened, trying not to interrupt. But after about half an hour, I realized we weren't heading downtown. We were going to the outskirts of the city. That was odd. What kind of restaurant could be out here? I wondered, but didn't say anything. I trust her. She probably knew what she was doing. We pulled up to an unassuming building. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary club. No signs, just a bouncer at the door. She took my hand, assured me everything would be fine, and led me inside. I felt slightly out of place but followed her. There was no reason not to trust her. The first thing that struck me when we entered was the music. It wasn't too loud, but rhythmic, with something hypnotic about it. The lighting was dim, and there were people everywhere, men and women laughing, talking, and drinking. But there was something unusual about their demeanor. They moved too freely, too uninhibitedly. I didn't know how to react. We walked further into the space, and that's when I realized where we were. I can only describe it as a club for people seeking more than just conversation. People were holding hands, embracing, flirting openly without a hint of shame. They wore clothing reminiscent of Adam and Eve, minimal, to say the least. Some lounged on sofas in the corner, others stood by the bar, and some danced as if they were in their own world. Others were even deepening their physical connection, if you catch my drift. Here, there were no boundaries or taboos. I was stunned. My first reaction was shock. Why did she bring me here? I couldn't even process how to feel. I wanted to leave immediately, to just turn around and go. But my daughter held my hand and looked at me so calmly, as if everything about this place was entirely normal. She nudged me toward the bar, ordered 2 cocktails and said, "Relax, Mom." Relax? I didn't even know how to breathe in this place. Everything around me felt so foreign. I watched these people. They were so confident, so free. Their smiles, their laughter, their touches. It all felt so unattainable to me. I sat there holding my drink, not knowing where to look. She told me she wanted to show me something new, something I had never seen before. I tried to listen to her, but everything around me was distracting. This place was different. Not bad, not good, just different. I saw women laughing, dancing, flirting as if no one in the world could judge them. It was so strange to me. I couldn't understand how they could be so self-assured. And yet, there was something else. I couldn't take my eyes off one couple standing nearby. She was whispering something to him, and he was looking at her as if the entire world had ceased to exist. It was beautiful, despite the strangeness of the situation. I realized I hadn't felt anything like that in a very long time. At one point, I noticed a man. He was standing by the bar, seemingly lost in his thoughts. Young, around 30, maybe a bit younger. He smiled at me, and I felt something stir inside me. It was absurd. I didn't know him, hadn't spoken to him, but his gaze was so soft, so open. I had never seen a man look at me like that. His eyes weren't demanding or leering, just a genuine look, as if he truly saw me. I averted my eyes, pretending nothing had happened. But honestly, everything inside me was in turmoil. It felt strange, unfamiliar, but pleasant. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible, and that feeling was new. After that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the club. Inside, I felt a jumble of shame, curiosity, irritation, and embarrassment. That place seemed so wrong, so strange, but I couldn't get it out of my head. My daughter said she wanted to show me something new, to shake me up. And perhaps she succeeded. But why that place? Why did she think I'd find something important there? I tried hard to forget. I went back to my usual routine, work, home, books. But everything I did reminded me of what I'd seen. The people, their confidence, their gazes, their bodies, the scents, the music. That man at the bar, his smile, his eyes, his presence. I berated myself for even thinking about it. "What are you doing?" I told myself. "You're a grown woman. You shouldn't be thinking about things like this." But it didn't help. A week passed, and my daughter called. She asked how I was. I said everything was fine, but she knew me. She knew I couldn't just forget. Then she suggested, "Let's go again." I refused. Of course I did. This wasn't for me. I said I had work, that I was tired, that I had plans. But they were all just excuses. She knew it, and I knew it too. The next day, I woke up with this feeling, like something inside me was pulling me back. I looked at my reflection in the mirror and couldn't understand why that place had affected me so much. Was I jealous of those people? Their freedom? Their confidence? Or was it that I saw myself in a completely different light? I thought about it for a long time until I realized that I wanted to try again. When I went there alone, I was trembling. Standing in front of the door, my heart was pounding wildly. I wanted to turn around and leave. But something inside me forced me to take a step. Inside, everything was just as it had been the first time. The music, the laughter, the smells. The people seemed relaxed, confident, and again I felt out of place, but I forced myself to take a step toward the bar. I ordered a cocktail and sat down at the counter, glancing around. I was looking for him, that man. It was foolish, I knew that, but I looked anyway, and when I saw him, it was as if my heart stopped. He was standing at the far end of the room, talking to someone. He was just as I remembered him. Confident, but not overly so. Easygoing, but not pushy. I watched him until he noticed me. He smiled. Just smiled. And at that moment, I felt something inside me begin to change. We didn't speak that evening. I couldn't bring myself to approach him. But that one glance was enough for me to know I would come back. After that, I started going there more often. Not every week, but a couple of times a month at least. I still felt awkward, still thought that I was doing something wrong. But I kept going. I couldn't stop. That place became something of an experiment for me. I studied it, and I studied myself. I tried to understand what was drawing me back there. Every time I saw him, I felt the same mix of emotions: embarrassment, a light happiness, fear. He would come over, ask me how I was. Sometimes we would just sit silently next to each other. Other times, we exchanged a few words. And every time I left, I found myself thinking about seeing him again. I didn't know where this road was leading. Everything that had happened to me in the past few weeks felt so new. I had lived in my familiar shell, my safe zone, for years, and suddenly, because of one visit, everything began to change. Not all at once, of course, but gradually, as if something inside me had awakened. Each time I returned to the club, I wondered why I was doing it. It was a place that didn't fit into any of my notions of what was right or normal, but perhaps that was why it drew me in. There were no rules here. People behaved however they wanted, did whatever they wanted with each other. They weren't afraid of judgment. They weren't afraid to show their true selves. I watched them, as if studying a new world. But what pulled me back the most was him, the man who had entered my life so unexpectedly. I didn't know who he was, his name, or where he lived, but I knew that every time I saw him, my heart beat faster. It was strange. I had long believed that feelings like this were part of my past, that at my age there was no place for such emotions. But there he was, and I couldn't ignore it. We started talking, not much, not often, but enough for me to begin feeling at ease around him. He didn't rush me, didn't ask questions that might unsettle me. He was just there, sometimes looking at me in a way that made me feel like he saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. It was strange, comforting, frightening, and thrilling all at once. At some point, I realized I was starting to look forward to these encounters. I caught myself thinking about how I would look, what our next conversation would be like. It scared me because I knew where we had met. I knew he kept coming to this place, and I was afraid that this was all just a game to him. I couldn't understand why someone like him would be interested in someone like me. There were women there, far younger and more beautiful than I was. Doubts tore at me. Each time I came home after seeing him, I felt both inspired and disappointed. I started wondering, what if he wasn't what I thought? What if I was making the same mistake I'd made before? I felt like I'd been burned enough in life to avoid taking risks again. And yet, I kept going back, kept seeing him. Sometimes I noticed him talking to other women. That was inevitable in a place like this. And each time I felt a pang of jealousy. It was ridiculous, wasn't it? I barely knew him, and yet I was jealous. At the same time, I knew I had no right to feel that way. We weren't anything to each other, just casual acquaintances. One evening, I stayed at the club longer than usual. We were sitting in a corner, drinking something he had ordered for us. I don't remember what we talked about. Probably something simple. But at some point, I felt like I could trust him. Not completely, of course, but at least a little. He was different. It didn't feel like the men I had known before. And yet, questions haunted me. What was he doing here? Why did he keep coming? Could someone I met in a place like this ever be something serious for me? I tried to push those thoughts away, but they kept coming back. While we were talking, he looked at me as if I was the only person in the room. It was unexpected. I hadn't felt that way in a long time. It was a mix of fear and joy. Fear, because I didn't know where this would lead. Joy, because I felt alive, because I realized I could still feel something. When I came home that evening, I couldn't fall asleep for a long time. I lay in bed, replaying every conversation, every glance, every touch in my mind. I thought about what this man meant to me. Why had he appeared in my life? What could he offer me? And what could I offer him? And most importantly, was it even worth pursuing? Every time I went there, I asked myself the same question. What was I looking for? The answer was always unclear. Sometimes it felt like I just wanted to be part of something bigger,